The gaming medium is so centered around heroes and villains, and often developers will use the tried and tested trope of good guy turns bad to deliver a surprise that nobody saw coming. Sometimes though, it's painfully obvious that an ally is soon to reveal themselves as an antagonist. All suspicion quickly turns into anticipation of when, rather than if, that reveal will take place. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 10 video game good guys you knew were villains all along. Number 10. Harry Flynn, Uncharted 2. Anyone with that clear of a British accent in a sea of American voices is surely worthy of suspicion. Making his introduction to the player in the opening chapter of Uncharted 2 Among Thieves, Harry Flynn is presented as one of Nate's past acquaintances. Sporting a slicked back hairdo and smarmy smug smile, Harry's slippery personality felt fitting of a man who would befriend and eventually betray a treasure hunter and notorious history thief. It doesn't take long for Flynn to turn on Nate and co. as he slinks away during a heist in Istanbul after acquiring the next clue on the trail to discovering Marco Polo's lost fleet. Drake spends the next 3 months in a Turkish jail cell, with its own bucket no less, and Harry returns to his post as antagonist Zoran Lazarevic's lapdog. Harry Flynn's betrayal of Nathan Drake was never a case of if it would happen, rather when. Number 9. Dr. Otto Octavius, Spider-Man. To anyone familiar with Spider-Man lore, it surely wasn't a surprise that the timid, awkward scientist Otto Octavius was destined for villainy. Developer Insomniac's take on the wall crawler was the first significant success for the character in video games since the Raimi movie tie-in titles, and the way it handled character development and interaction was at the heart of its charm. From Peter's mentorship of Miles Morales, his rekindling romance with MJ, and most prominently, his employment with Dr. Octavius. When we're introduced to the now infamous bad guy, his friendship with Peter is sincere. The pair rely on each other for their critical research, and while Otto is technically Pete's boss early on, it always feels like they're closer to work partners than a simple employer-to-employee dynamic. In an unsurprising twist, however, the acquisition of 4 extra big metal limbs brings out the villain in poor old Otto. And the once introverted nuclear physicist becomes the primary thorn in Spider-Man's side for the closing chapters of the game. A truly great descent into intellectual madness and criminal behavior, Otto's development was impeccably handled by Insomniac. Unfortunately, to anyone familiar with the source material, and most people are, it was an arc that was all too predictable. Number 8. Citra, Far Cry 3. Far Cry 3's character roster is undoubtedly overshadowed by Vas Montenegro, a villain that stands alongside the very best in the gaming medium. The Rook Islands are packed with suspicious people and uneasy alliances. Protagonist Jason Brody is a fish out of water, and though he finds himself more and more comfortable in the setting as the game goes on, it never truly feels like he has control over the situation. The mysterious Citra is introduced as the leader of the Rakyat, and though her provocative looks and alluring aura pique Jason's interest, her character development is far too classified for the player to ever truly understand her intentions. Though she may not be the game's primary antagonist, Citra's suspicious personality has her constantly deflect any questions Jason Brody has, and the endings prove that she's far from charitable. After kidnapping the friends that Jason spent the game's duration trying to save, Citra gives you an ultimate choice: leave the island or join her and rule together. If the player chooses the latter, the game ends with Brody's rather undignified death at the hands of Citra herself. Untrustworthy to the very end, Citra was simply too mysterious to ever feel like a good guy. Number 7. V, Devil May Cry 5. Devil May Cry 5 was a return to form following the highly divisive DMC Devil May Cry, and with it came a return to the franchise's roots. Dante's back sporting his iconic red coat and ashy white hair, the gothic noirish aesthetics return, and the story largely continues from Devil May Cry 4. Reunions are spoiled slightly when a strangely tight-lipped visitor arrives to Dante's humble abode, and though he's likable throughout, it's always obvious that he's hiding a darker past. V's monosyllabic tone and eerie aesthetics make him far from the dashing hero that gamers have become familiar with, and though he is presented as 1/3 of the game's protagonists, his true nature is revealed to be the human half of Dante's evil brother. It's a plot twist that sounds ridiculous unless you're familiar with the series' wacky presentation, and left many of us shocked at how the story unfolded, but far less so with the reveal itself. When the truth about V is revealed, it doesn't feel like he's betraying Dante and Nero, rather a returning to the state in which we knew him before. However, V's inherent ties to villainy, while intriguing, were not so surprising. Number 6. Yaldabaoth/Imposter Igor, Persona 5. Providing a synopsis to the immensely convoluted Persona 5 is a mighty task to undertake. The story's littered with themes of awakening an inner power and rehabilitating the evil deeds of their peers by fixing their corrupt hearts, all while maintaining good grades at the esteemed Shujin Academy. Fans of the franchise are all too familiar with such complexities, even finding comfort in the madness. However, upon loading up the 5th entry in the series, or 6th because for some reason there's 2 Persona 2s, that comfort immediately subsides when series regular Igor opens his mouth. To anyone familiar with Igor's inclusion in Persona 4 Golden, the all-seeing character presented in the series' 5th installment is immediately suspicious, as his voice is far more grisly than before and his usual politeness is curiously absent. It turns out that the Igor we're introduced to in Persona 5 is in fact not the real Igor. He's an imposter who's been secretly pulling the strings and stacking the deck against the protagonist throughout. A classic twist that's been used in all media, from Hollywood blockbusters to indie darlings, the imposter arc was an intriguing bait and switch. To Persona fans, however, something was always amiss. Number 5. Thordan the Seventh, Final Fantasy XIV. Sporting a beard the size of a chocobo's tail and an evil stare that remains steadfast throughout, Thordan's wicked demeanor is as obvious as the day is long. The Archbishop of the reclusive Ishgard, Thordan, 7th of his name, is a character who never escapes his painfully obvious aesthetics. While introductions are pleasant in the opening act of Final Fantasy XIV's first expansion, Heavensward, the croaky voice acting and icy cold aura is significant as an indicator that he's far from the hospitable chap we were expecting. We're introduced to both Thordan and Ishgard itself as a safe haven for the Scions to lie low while tensions were high from the conclusion of A Realm Reborn. Unexplored territories and new allies are a source of great comfort and wonder, yet said comfort is quickly drowned by a sense of distrust at the Archbishop's increasingly unsettling presence. It's no surprise then that Thordan unveils himself as the main antagonist of the tale, imprisoning his illegitimate son and standout character Emmerich and forging a dubious alliance with the Ascians for good measure. It's a fusion that has significant flaws. Number 4. David, The Last of Us. Naughty Dog's crowning achievement on PS3, The Last of Us is a game that has no heroes, rather survivors and infected. The cost of survival for so many is their humanity, and the apocalypse naturally brings out the worst in some folks who are simply trying to last the day. While Ellie is traveling alone fending for herself and catering to an injured Joel, she comes across such a person. David, a slender, wiry chap who politely greets her in a respectable manner, turns out to be the furthest thing from chivalrous, as it becomes clear he's the leader of a cannibalistic group of survivors who see Ellie as an opportunity for sustenance. The game lulls you into a very false sense of reliance with the character as the pair successfully exterminate a swarm of approaching infected. But the reliance never turns into trust, as the game's hostile world often punishes those who have faith in their fellow man. David is a stranger in a very strange land, and anyone who feels it appropriate to waltz up and introduce themselves in a casual manner is either oblivious to the events of the past 20 years or is hiding far more than they let on. Number 3. The Salieri crime family, Mafia. Surely the clue is in the name. A game set in the Prohibition era during the 1930s that includes the Italian-American Mafia and a handful of shootouts across its 20 chapters was never gonna be void of villainy. The player takes the role of Tommy Angelo and has front row seats to witness his descent from humble cab driver to respected Mafia lieutenant. Gaining the trust of Don Salieri and his goons as they steal, shoot, and slander their way to the top of the fictional city of Lost Heaven, Tommy soon enters the crosshairs of the very family he swore to serve. It's hard to believe that the Salieri clan weren't going to turn their back on him eventually, but there's no denying their likability in the game's early missions. You become a supporter of the family in their ground war against the opposing Morello crime family, and yet when Tommy aligns with Paulie and Sam and the Don don't take too kindly, it feels more like an inevitability rather than a surprise. Meddling in the business of big-time gangsters is never a good idea, and as Tommy knows, Salieri and his accomplices were far from the good guys of the story. Number 2. Micah, Red Dead Redemption 2. Micah is a near impossible character to like, and labeling him as good is a stretch, but his acceptance into the Vandalin gang meant he was a brother in all but blood to Arthur, the hero of the story. As reluctant as it may be for both Arthur and indeed the player, Micah is technically on our side, right up until the moment where he isn't. The themes of 2018's Red Dead Redemption 2 explore the intricacies of what it means to be a hero or a villain, but when we're introduced to Micah, he truly never gives off any other vibe than the latter, potentially making him one of the worst characters in video games. Deceiving the gang by working with the Pinkerton Detective Agency, betraying those who took him in is surely the lowest an outlaw can get, and Micah stoops to such a level with little remorse. The cowardly nature of Micah's betrayal is a surprise, as he always gave off far more obvious and aggressive vibes than his true slimy self. What isn't surprising, however, is that he would reach the game's conclusion as an enemy to the gang. Micah's deception was significant, but he never tried to deceive the gang into believing he was a good person. Maybe because none of them truly are. Number 1. Lord Gannabel / Mennick, Tales of Arise. Arriving in the Second Realm in 2021's Tales of Arise, it becomes clear that the people of this land are suffocated by severe trust issues and a harsh authoritarian regime. Sitting atop the hierarchy is Lord Gannabel, a sinister lord who uses his trickery to turn the people against one another. Across the town is the resistance group known as the Silver Swords that's bravely fronted by a slender, sharply dressed chap known as Mennick. Immediately, he looks far too shifty to be leading a ragtag band of rebels. Sporting an evil-looking face resting on a razor-sharp jawline, it was obvious that he wasn't to be trusted. And sure enough, Lord Gannabel's good guy alter ego Mennick wasn't fooling anybody, except the party, I guess. It's the first significant twist to the otherwise formulaic JRPG story, and while it opens up several narrative threads that continue throughout, it falls flat simply because the villainous appearance of Gannabel couldn't be hidden in plain sight. Unveiling the leader of the plucky resistance as the realm's biggest baddie could have been a critical, memorable moment, but unfortunately it fades into the background of an otherwise superb story. And that's our list. Do let me know down in that comment section if you can think of any other video game good guys that you knew were villains all along. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come say hi to me on my Twitter account where I'm @JessMcDonnell, but make sure you stay tuned here for plenty more gaming goodness.